No, but now
Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love. Hearts and full life flies before thee, worthy as the sun above. Melt the clouds of sin and sadness, drive the dark of doubt away. Deliver of immortal gladness, fill us with all light and day. Joyful, 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 all thy works with joy so around the earth and heaven reflect thy rays. Stars and angels sing around thee, center of unbroken praise. Field and forest, vale and mountain, blossoming meadow, flashing sea, chanting bird and flowing fountain, call us to rejoice in thee. Father, Father, Christ our brother, all who live in all our thine. Teach us how to love each other, lift us to the joy divine. Mortals join the mighty choir, the sweet song morning stars began. Father, love is ringing chorus, brother, love binds man to man. Ever singing marching upward, victors in the midst of strife. Joy from music lifts us onward in the triumph song of life.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
The World Health Organization warning that the new coronavirus pandemic may be here for good. And even if a vaccine is found, controlling coronavirus will require, quote, a massive effort. Does that mean replicating on a global scale what the South Koreans have done with draconian tracking of all citizens and an army of contact tracers? The high road to a dystopian future where we're policed in our every movement?
People who live in these tower blocks in a poor area of Melbourne are some of the most vulnerable in society. Many have underlying health conditions. For 5 days, which began on Saturday, 3,000 people are banned from leaving their homes. 500 police officers are patrolling the tower blocks during each shift to make sure no one breaks the law.
The COVID-19 house arrest. Look, they're even forced to wear ankle monitors like common criminals.
I asked the sheriff, I said, what happens if we refuse to wear this ankle bracelet? Because I'm not wearing one. He's like, well, it's just going to get escalated quickly.
A Tampa Bay pastor has been arrested for violating coronavirus social distancing rules.
You may keep your secrets from your friends, from your parents, your children, your doctor, even your personal trainer. But it takes real effort to conceal your thoughts from Google. And if that is true today, in future, there may be nowhere to hide.
Right now in London, there's a lot of discussion about the CCTV cameras everywhere who are taking everybody's faces without their knowledge, therefore without their permission and so on. And there's a lot of controversy about this.
Law enforcement flew drones over protests in Minneapolis and New York. Facial recognition software is being used with some police body cameras. Law enforcement can use signals from your cell phone or automatic license plate readers to follow your movements.
You might be doing something that you think is perfectly fine right now, but then later you might be charged based on camera footage, based on geolocation data from your mobile phone, and so on.
This is a very interesting time to be living in. Many people are fearful, wanting to know if they're going to have a job tomorrow or not. What is this new normal? This study is going to cover some very controversial issues, so please fasten your seatbelts. And as I encourage you at all times, please research every single thing you see in this study. All over the world, the nations are very angry. They can't explain why their governments are keeping them under house arrest, and when laws have been eased, they have revolted. They want to know who their governments are taking orders from, and as many don't know how to articulate themselves about their frustrations, they're taking out their deep-rooted frustrations on government property, the police, and sometimes even on each other. They know something's not right, but they can't put their finger on it. But each leader of each culture is responding differently to the cry of their people. Different nations are using very harsh draconian measures to keep their civilians in line, and it is very important to see how each one of them are functioning. In the Philippines in Southeast Asia, the government has made a law for those who break the lockdown curfew. It is a shoot-to-kill policy for any civilian who does not apply by the state law, and many are questioning these human rights violations. In Colombia, in the north of South America, they have taken even more extreme and harsh measures for the civilian population, where brutal death squads are being hired to also murder anyone who breaks the lockdown curfew laws that they say will help to slow down the COVID-19 virus. That's interesting. They're using fear to keep the nation in line. In Iran, in Western Asia, the civilian population are told that if you revolt, you die. Pakistan in Southeast Asia is on the brink of a COVID-19 financial collapse, and a locust invasion has not helped. But different minority groups are sadly being unfairly targeted by very extreme radical Islamic groups that are being protected by the government. There are even Muslim minority groups who are not spared the wrath of these extremists, even during a lockdown. But Hindus and Christians have become a key target, where they are even being denied food to eat unless they convert to Islam. They are being called infidels. What kind of absolute inhumane foolishness is that? Are these people that cold and heartless? That is not religious extremism. That's just disgusting. There are many other countries that are also using some very harsh measures, and when observed very closely, you can see that it is a model of what they will do to the entire world in the not too distant future if governments are given this level of power and control to use freely.
A renewed surge in coronavirus cases has left officials with no other choice but to seal off the Victorian state from the rest of the nation.
9 public housing towers in those postcodes will be the subject of a complete lockdown, effective immediately.
I realized that we're in complete lockdown, as in we can't go out for exercise, can't go out for work, we can't go get groceries, and any essentials either. You can see police presence on every access point. It's scary. It is traumatic.
Defence Force personnel will help police ensure Melburnians do not leave the metropolitan area.
As Victoria Police put in place roadblocks
and other command centres to ensure that that hard boundary between metropolitan Melbourne and regional Victoria is not breached.
The Army and police are getting ready to shut down the New South Wales border. From midnight, Victorians will face a big fine or even jail if they try to leave the state without a permit.
These are some of the 650 officers whose job is to keep Victorians out of New South Wales. The military also called in.
There'll be some 100 members of defence on the ground from Thursday, and that will grow to 350 over the weekend.
Drones and planes will keep watch on smaller rural roads. There'll be big penalties for those caught trying to sneak in.
Are these moves even legal? Let's bring in attorney Andrew Stoltman to help us figure this out.
According to the mayor, beginning Friday night, if police get a report of a large party, the city will have the authority to shut off water and power services to residents within 48 hours.
Mayor Bill de Blasio, checkpoints are being set up in New York City to trace travelers coming from out of state starting today.
They'll be reminded that failure to quarantine is a violation of state law, and it comes with serious penalties. In fact, under certain circumstances, the fines can be as high as $10,000.
Safety groups are turning to drones to monitor public spaces.
Cops across India are nabbing lockdown violators with the help of electronic drone surveillance.
There are an estimated more than 300 million surveillance cameras in China, and authorities are using them to monitor Chinese citizens.
Many of the surveillance cameras in use in China now are equipped with facial recognition capabilities, which simply gives the authorities the ability to track who specifically has gone to which precise location.
Combine that with data scraped from hospital records, police files, and public transportation history. All that is stored and linked to national ID cards, which gives the Chinese government granular information about all its citizens. Chinese health officials say all this data is in the pursuit of controlling the epidemic. In South Korea, health authorities are legally allowed to sift through credit card records, CCTV footage, and mobile phone locations to pin down the travel histories of those infected or at risk. That information is then shared with the public. In China's surveillance state, not only do authorities have access to more data than other governments, but citizens have no way to opt out of that data collection.
Countries around the world are rushing to use technology to slow the spread of the coronavirus. Some governments are tracking citizens with the help of apps, drones, and other high-tech methods. But critics warn the surveillance may go too far.
The extent of surveillance varies from country to country. In Europe, voluntary apps track people's symptoms. And this one in Israel even alerts users if they've come into contact with someone who's infected. Already, U.S. officials are turning to tech companies to tap into people's digital data to see if they're practicing social distancing. And in Tunisia, a police robot questions suspected violators of the country's lockdown. All high-tech tools designed to slow the spread of COVID-19.
They verbally told me that, your phone will be satellite tracked.
He just didn't realize how closely.
My phone ran out of battery for about 15 minutes. I plugged it in. But by then, there was already 2 police officers knocking at my door.
Tonight, digitising discrimination. Kenya's High Court upholds a petition to put a new digital ID scheme on hold. Critics had accused it of discriminating against vulnerable communities.
We are so excited to be a part of the UNICEF Wearables for Good Challenge.
That's how Cushy Baby was born. A way to prevent 1.5 million children in rural India from dying every year, simply by digitizing medical records and getting mothers and children to carry them at all times. How? By creating a chip in the shape of a culturally accepted talisman. The cost? Less than $1. It's the small changes that change everything.
The World Food Programme current exploration of blockchain technology called Building Blocks is implemented in the Zatari and Azraq refugee camps. We authorize the transactions using iris scanning or iris biometric technology.
بدون جراب يكون معي كاشير بقول لي اعطيني عينك بس طلع بالكاميرا اطلع فيه يعني بعطيني يعني عمل كبسه للعين او كذا صورها يعني للعين.
An unlikely digital revolution is changing lives.
Ban Mai Nai Soi camp. More than 10,000 Myanmar refugees live here. He's here to oversee the deployment of the new system.
This exercise in Thailand is critical for UNHCR. This is the first major rollout of the biometric systems. We will verify and enroll 120,000 refugees.
Fingerprints, iris scans, photos, all attached to a name, a date of birth. Everything is uploaded onto UNHCR's global database.
Your interact. Collected in real time into $1 trillion a year industry.
Hacking has increasingly become what governments consider a legitimate investigative tool. They use the same methods and techniques as criminal hackers. And what this means is they will try to remotely take over your device. Once they do this, by detecting a vulnerability in the software that your device runs, such as Apple's iOS or Microsoft Windows, they can craft a special kind of attack code called an exploit. They then launch this exploit at the vulnerability on your device, which allows them to take total control of that device. Anything you can do on that device, the attacker, in this case the government, can do. They can read your email, they can collect every document, they can look at your contact book, they can turn the location services on, they can see anything that is on that phone instantly and send it back home to the mothership. They can do the same with laptops. The other prong that we forget so frequently is that in many cases they don't need to hack our devices. They can simply ask Google for a copy of our email box because Google saves a copy of that. Everything that you ever typed into that search box, Google has a copy of. Every private message that you've sent on Facebook, every link that you've clicked, everything that you've liked, they keep a permanent record of. And all of these things are available not just to these companies, but to our governments as they are increasingly deputized as sort of miniature arms of government.
Smart cities will pullulate with sensors, all joined together by the Internet of Things. Bollards communing invisibly with lampposts, so there is always a parking space for your electric car, so that no bin goes unemptied, no street unswept, and the urban environment is as antiseptic as a Zurich pharmacy. But this technology could also be used to keep every citizen under In future, voice connectivity will be in every room and almost every object. Your mattress will monitor your nightmares. Your fridge will beep for more cheese. Your front door will sweep wide the moment you approach like some silent butler. Your smart meter will go hustling of its own accord for the cheapest electricity, and every one of them minutely transcribing your every habit in tiny electronic shorthand, stored not in their chips or in their innards, nowhere you can find it, but in some great cloud of data that lowers ever more oppressively over the human race.
This is the direction this planet is heading towards, and the global pandemic COVID-19 lockdown has only greatly accelerated a course that the world was already on. We see that they can now impose the military to resolve law and order. Police can surround and control an estate and decide who can come in and who can come out. They can turn up at your house unannounced. There are facial recognition CCTV cameras in highly concentrated cities. Different air surveillance that includes drones and planes to assess your movements. Different checkpoints to monitor where you are traveling from and where you're going to. Mayors can cut off your water and electricity supply as they please. There'll be big fines or jail time if you do not comply with the state. Satellite tracking of your phones and its apps, ankle monitors tracking children from when they are born, and hold communities within refugee camps on a biometric database so that the entire world can be tracked and traced. But how can you bring the whole world to its knees to bring everyone in line? What is the one thing mankind cannot live without?
But now the World Food Program analysis shows also, due to the coronavirus, that an additional 130 million people could be pushed to the brink of starvation by the end of 2020. That's a total of 265 million people.
A silent cry for help, red rags, pieces of cloth, even shirts signaling that inside, behind those windows, there's a family in need.
Often we are down to eating once a day. At the beginning, neighbors helped us with some food, but now they also ran out. The government says, stay in, but we can't eat boards or tiles.
We are going to lose through this pandemic a lot of farms. We're going to lose a lot of restaurants. We're going to lose a lot of food service people.
But they're rationing food. If this goes on much, much longer, then we could start to see actual starvation in America. We're doing far much worse than any developed Western nation.
We haven't received relief aid for 9 months. Relief organizations have stopped coming here. And because there's a curfew in place, people cannot get out to work. They can't need food, medicine, carpet, blankets, and much more.
In India, 4 record-setting days of new cases have pushed more than 100 million people back into lockdown. It's impossible to find work, Mangal Singh told us. If the disease doesn't kill us, hunger will.
From the earliest of time, whenever communities grew and expanded and turned into metropolitan cities, there was always this vast big gulf between both the rich and the poor. And in our current climate, the gulf has gotten even wider, where half of the world's population is currently poor and living in dire poverty. And aid donors that once bailed out poverty-stricken nations have had to reduce and cut back in sending foreign aid because of the deep pressure of the coronavirus. And the institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, which claim they want to assist poverty-stricken nations, continue the cycle by keeping nations in permanent debt. Even nations that have not fully recovered from war, like Syria, in the Middle East and Western Asia, whether you agree with the leader or not, to keep them in line to benefit US self-interests. An economic stranglehold through sanctions has been put on innocent individuals that will only increase its poverty. It has been titled the Caesar Act. It was put into place by the US government, and it even threatens any nation or institution that has any dealings with Syria. Its objective? Well, to put it in a nutshell, it is going to ruin the country of Syrians live in poverty. About 40% were unemployed at the end of 2019, the latest figures available, and joblessness has only increased because of government restrictions to control the coronavirus. And these sanctions are going to bring that country to its knees. But it is not only Syria that is deeply affected. Its next-door neighbor, Lebanon, is also crippled by the US sanctions, and it has also helped to increase the poverty in that country. For Lebanon has a national debt of $92 billion, nearly 170% of its GDP, one of the highest debt ratios in the world. And its already downward spiral of poverty has not been helped by an explosion.
Just after 7 p.m. local, the enormous explosion rocked the port city, sending shockwaves miles away at sea.
The magnitude of the blast area is the first thing that strikes you as you survey this fractured landscape. Mile upon mile of devastation. It just goes on.
Anti-refugee sentiment in Lebanon is not new. Some blame the refugees from the war in Syria for worsening the economic crisis and competing for a job with Lebanese workers.
You have a percentage of risk from going down and contracting coronavirus, but the percentage of risk of you dying of hunger or homelessness has become a lot bigger than the risk that coronavirus gives.
How is its health system going to treat thousands of injured people and those sick with COVID-19 after at least 3 hospitals have been destroyed?
And where is a country that's almost entirely reliant on imports from the sea going to get food from when its port is a crater?
While many may think that the global recession and the rapid increase in joblessness is as a result of the coronavirus lockdown, as already mentioned, it has only accelerated a path the world was already on. Let us give a few examples. There is apparently enough coal resources in the earth to sustain the global energy markets for the next 2,000 years, according to reliable sources. But the coal industry that helped to propel the Industrial Revolution is really struggling. To be honest, it is almost becoming extinct. In a book published in 1979 titled Energy, the Created Crisis, written by the late US-based British economist Anthony Cyril Sutton, he said that at the end of the 19th century, coal supplied about 90% of the US energy consumption. By 1972, only 17% of energy came from coal. So as we look at these many different articles from a variety of different public journals from around March 2020, it may look like it was the coronavirus lockdown that has greatly damaged the coal industry. But if you look at articles from previous years since around 2015, it is very clear that the lockdown has only put the final nail in the coffin.
Across America, more and more coal-fired smokestacks are smoke-free. The power plants beneath them, cold and dark. The mines that once fed them, abandoned.
The narrator was born, raised, and currently lives in the UK. And though there are other places around the world that are far worse off, the UK faces a deeper recession than any other country in the so-called developed world. Studies have shown that the unemployment rate was already rising even before the coronavirus crisis. In 2018, House of Fraser was to act 31 stores and 6,000 jobs, and in that same year, 50,000 high street jobs were lost or threatened. And the lockdown in 2020 has only accelerated joblessness. Harrods is cutting 700 jobs. Selfridges is cutting 450 jobs. Currys PC World is cutting 800. Since 2019, 38,000 to 80,000 car jobs worldwide will be cut. And in that same year, 60,000 bank jobs worldwide are under threat. In 2020, 110,000 airline jobs are at risk, and they say the airline industry will not fully recover until 2024. Primark cancelled £2.4 billion of orders from Bangladesh during the lockdown that has put 1 million garment workers in Bangladesh out of a job. E-News has been cancelled since the lockdown. The global film industry has a loss of $5 billion. The music industry does not know if it will last, and we are seeing whole industries and businesses collapse since the lockdown, and the gulf between the rich and the poor gets even wider and wider. Most cannot see where things are heading. This world is steering into a direction where eventually no man will be able to buy or sell. And there are two very disturbing things that need to be questioned. With businesses collapsing worldwide, and with many people being laid off and without a job, nation states all over the world are expanding the sales of their military. Why is that? And the United States is telling the world to come together into a world order. I wonder why.
Does more military spending make the world safer, or is it a warning of conflict to come?
Worldwide military spending is at its highest for 10 years. Where is all that money going? And might governments change their priorities as the coronavirus spreads?
Choices. We think that the entire world needs to work together to ensure that every country, including China, behaves in the international system in ways that are appropriate and consistent with the international order.
Since the lockdown, many newspapers and magazines are now boldly saying that we are now living in a new world order. This was language that was once upon a time confined to so-called extremist conspiracy theorist fringe groups such as so-called. But as certain realities have kicked in, where people are seeing that freedoms are being stripped away very rapidly in such a short space of time, a few people are waking up to the reality that something is not just quite right. But what exactly is the new world order? Is it something that is to come in the way distant future, or have we already been living in it for years? A book was published 30 years ago in 1990 titled The Keys of This Blood by the late Malachi Brendan Martin, a former Irish Catholic Jesuit priest, and he outlined in his introduction exactly what the New World Order is. Who will establish the first one world system that has ever existed in the Society of Nations? Who will hold and wield the dual power of authority and control over each of us as individuals and over all of us together as a community? Listen to what he says next and see if it relates to us all today. He said that our way of life as individuals and citizens of the nations, our families and our jobs, our educational systems and our religions and our cultures will have been powerfully altered forever. No sector of our lives will remain untouched. Those of us who are under 70 will see at least the basic structures of the New World Government installed. Those of us under 40 will surely live under its legislative, executive, and judiciary authority and control. So who are pulling the strings behind the scenes? Is it just one group or an octopus with many different tentacles to achieve one global objective? There are some who think it is the corporations that control everything.
There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. Business, Mr. Beale.
So as the 1976 film Network declares, it is the multinational and transnational corporations that govern how the world works. This is one school of thought that dominates people's thinking. There are others who believe that it is the secret societies, the ancient mystery schools, that are the ones who are pulling all of the strings behind the scenes, and that people who are in very high and influential positions are usually a member of one of these very secretive groups. Two of the most famous men who created them in the modern world are Adam Weishaupt, a German Jesuit-educated professor who founded the Bavarian infamous Illuminati. Many believe that it is this secret society who are pulling the strings of every major organization in the world, according to The Guardian. The other is Joseph Ratzinger, a Polish-born, London-based political intriguer who founded what many call the world's most secretive society, the Bilderberg Group, the most influential group in the world, where many believe that it is they who are really plotting the New World Order, according to the London Independent. Since the coronavirus lockdown, the owners of Walmart, the Waltons, the richest family in America and the richest non-royal family on the earth, have profited handsomely, where they earn £57,000 every minute. My goodness. Many believe that they and many of the older royal families of Europe are the ones who are really pulling the strings behind the scenes, and many think that the old European monarchies are linked to the New World Order and are still ruling the world, the most famous dynasty being the Rothschild. The most famous one alive is British banker Lord Jacob Rothschild. The Rothschild dynasty was founded by German Jewish banker Meir Amschel in Germany, who adopted the coat of arms of the Holy Roman Empire, and in the center is the red shield, that today is called in German the Rothschild. They acquired their wealth from financing wars, and in the 19th century the Duke of Wellington received payment by Nathan Rothschild, Meir Amschel's son, that tipped the balance of the Napoleonic Wars, and Nathan also profited handsomely from the Atlantic slave trade by selling 88 black African slaves in Antigua in the Caribbean, according to the Financial Times. They also got into the diamond industry, and it was the Rothschilds who gave £1 million in payment to Cecil Rhodes to set up his De Beers mining company. And this is why many also believe that there is a Jewish conspiracy to take over the whole world, and also that it is the bankers who are the true players.
Most financial institutions, including Community America, are very highly capitalized. We are in a very stable position, so there's not going to be an issue with any kind of financial or run on the banks.
Wall Street is probably one of the most powerful players in the financial world that has a secret fraternity of very influential players. This 1929 Wall Street secret society have been able to skillfully make US banks take over the entire world. In a book titled The Secrets of the Federal Reserve by the late Eustace Mullins, it described how US Senator Nelson Aldrich had a secret Jekyll Island meeting in November 1910 to create a private central bank, and one of its attendees, the German-born banker Paul M. Warburg, has been described as its chief architect. The book asserted that this bank was behind the financial crash of 1929 that was used to paralyze the economic structure of the world and to create a global depression, and it quotes a New York Times article to prove its case. Whether it is true or not, the narrator cannot say, but in the 1930s, central bankers created the little-known Bank of International Settlements that aligned all the central banks in the West into one clique. Its mastermind standing on the far right was Horace Greeley Hjalmar Schacht, Adolf Hitler's Minister of Economics, who stands next to Montagu Norman, Governor of the Bank of England, where he stands next to US banker Benjamin Strong, Governor of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Though little is known about this elite private club of central bankers, there are many who believe that these central banks are behind the financing of modern warfare, and according to the South China Morning Post, the coronavirus could trigger a global financial crisis, and they say that the central bankers are to blame. So many believe that the bankers rule, but let us go into the archives of credible sources in both aristocratic, military and political circles to see who are the real players who are pulling the strings on the world stage and who planned events years ahead of its time. The late Edith Starr Miller was a New York socialite, the only child of a wealthy industrialist who married an English nobleman, Almeric Hugh Paget, 1st Baron Queensberry, where she got the title Lady Queensberry. She spent 10 years researching a book, but she died a number of months before her book was even published in 1933. Despite her own biases and political views, she tells the reader in her book Occult Theocracy that it is not designed to be a scholarly, literary work and that each person must come to their own conclusions, but she outlines who are pulling the strings. She said that the esoteric aims of most societies are all directed towards the same end, namely, the concentration of political, economic, and intellectual power into the hands of a small group of individuals, each of whom controls a branch of the international life, material, and spiritual of the world today. The main branches thus controlled are, and highlighted in red, number 1, the international banking groups and their subsidiaries, and number 2, international industrial and commercial control groups with their interlocking directorates. She wasn't alone in her conclusions. Major General Smedley Darlington Butler was the most decorated man in the US military at the time of his death in 1940. He would travel throughout the United States of America and he would see hundreds and thousands of graves of innocent dead soldiers in cemeteries, and he was very sad that it was a few corporations and many men who had profited from war while others died. So he documented his deep frustrations in a book titled War is a Racket, and he pretty much comes to the same conclusion as Lady Queensberry. When writing about World War I, he said that war is a racket. Only a small inside group knows what it is about. Let us not forget the bankers who financed the war. If anyone had the cream of the profits, it was, and highlighted in red, the bankers. Other patriotic and highlighted in red again, industrialists and speculators chiseled their way into war profits. The late political scientist Zbigniew Brzezinski was the National Security Advisor to US President Jimmy Carter. He wrote a book in 1970 titled Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technocratic Era, and he had inside knowledge and documented that the international banks, and repeating the previous two, multinational corporations, who are acting and planning in terms that are in advance of the political concepts of the nation state. An English economist and journalist, Rodney Atkinson, the elder brother of the English comedian Rowan Atkinson, wrote a book titled Europe's Full Circle in 1996. and he repeated the same words as Brzezinski, and also said that the principal element of fascism is a system of corporate and collective power. The trade unionists, and highlighted in red, bankers and multinational corporations who have for decades attended the meetings of corporate elites find that linguistic, cultural, parliamentary, and religious differences are all barriers to their supernatural structures and controls. The Hoover Institute on War, Revolution, and Peace in Stanford University in California is a think tank and war archive. The late US-based British economist Anthony C. Sutton, while a staff there, had privy access to many sensitive documents, and he wrote a number of books from this material he acquired, and from state documents he proved that Wall Street is a huge main player in covertly financing both wars and revolutions to benefit a small corporate monopoly. Anthony C. Sutton added one more to the system, and said that foreign policy is the acquisition of markets and economic power, profit, if you will, for a small group of, and highlighted in red, giant multinationals under the virtual control of a few banking investment houses, and the other one is the controlling families. When former MI5 agent Benito Mussolini rose into power to introduce fascism into the 20th century, many are familiar with his complete support by the papacy, with the signing of the Lateran Treaty of 1929. But it would have been impossible for religion alone to propel Mussolini into power. He had political support from English statesman Winston Churchill while he was the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, as documented in the New York Times on January 21st, 1927. When President Roosevelt was in power, in his personal archives there is a letter from Benito Mussolini to Roosevelt commending him on how they should work together. So he had support from Cardinal Pietro Gasparri, the Vatican Secretary of State, the Italian monarch Victor Emmanuel III, and the little-known US banker Thomas William Lamont Jr., who on behalf of J.P. Morgan gave Benito Mussolini a loan in order to start up fascism, as documented in the New York Times on April 14, 1925. One man who fled fascist Italy documented in a book titled The Dollar and the Vatican how it worked, and the late Avram Manhattan repeated and elaborated on the main players on the world stage. And when describing the rise of fascism, he said that European vested interests, ranging from, and highlighted in red, monarchies to high industrial and financial magnates, and the respectable middle classes, these, even more readily than their American counterparts, sided instantly with fascism and brought it to power. The Vatican and European and American capitalism acted systematically and in concord from the very beginning. Although at first independently, they soon joined forces, and American capitalism played a more important part in helping the rise of fascism than is generally realized. Avram Manhattan said it was the bankers, monarchies, industrialists, and specifically Western capitalism in both Europe and in America that created fascism in Italy. And another man also confirmed that they are the only ones who have the power to recreate it all over again in the future. The champions of Western capitalism, Malachi Martin said, the transnationalists and internationalists of America and Europe appear to be far and away the most effective and powerful architects of the New World Order, for the simple reason that their power base rests on the indispensable pillars of, and please look at the words underlined, money and technology. Please take a screenshot of that quote so you can understand how the New World Order really works. And we will briefly look at a very destructive model of one of the first attempts in modern times to control the entire planet. It was during the Second World War.
Here they come.
What are we gonna do?
We'll bring hell down from on high.
Americans love to throw it in people's face that it was they who saved the world from European fascism. That is far from the truth. They profited from the first, and they would also profit from the second. Major General Smedley Butler said that in the World War I, a mere handful garnered the profits of the conflict. At least 21,000 new millionaires and billionaires were made in the United States during the World War. Anthony C. Sutton, whose research is now getting clearer light, documented that it was a corporate takeover of the world that was responsible for the Second World War, where it was Wall Street who financed and who put into power both the Führer, Adolf Hitler in Germany, and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the United States of America, who both, not by coincidence, came into power in the same year, in 1933, and who both had the eagle as their symbol. That's very interesting. President FDR was a perfect candidate for his role who ticks all of the right boxes. He was born into two prominent business families, the Delanos and the Roosevelts. His great-grandfather James Roosevelt founded the Bank of New York, so he was born into a banking dynasty, and he himself was a Wall Street banker. His wife Eleanor Roosevelt, who was his fifth cousin, was the daughter of Elliott Bullock Roosevelt, the younger brother of 26th U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. The 28th U.S. President Woodrow Wilson appointed his mother's brother and his favorite uncle Frederick Adrian Delano II on the board of the newly founded Federal Reserve Bank, who is seated on the bottom right of this picture, where he became its first vice chair, and FDR also appointed his uncle as an advisor in his government. FDR was also initiated as a Scottish Rite Freemason, so he was a member of a secret society, who was born into a prominent influential family with strong industrial and banking connections. He tried to downplay something that he was attempting to do. If you carefully look at the words on this monument, he said, by a handful of individual rulers called this a new order. It is not new, and it is not order. But Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States of America, attempted to introduce Mussolini's corporate fascist system into the United States of America. What many people are unaware of is that according to the Washington Post, Mussolini was highly praised by the United States when he came into power as a strongman for doing away with communism. In Forbes magazine in 2012, it confirms that Mussolini's fascist economic policy was a model for the United States government during the 1930s. It also documents that Mahatma Gandhi, the so-called Hindu peacemaker, also praised Benito Mussolini. President Roosevelt attempted to introduce Mussolini's model in the year he was elected in 1933. It was titled the National Recovery Administration, or its abbreviation, the NRA. To make it as simple as possible for the average person to understand what the aim of the NRA was, it allowed a small number of large companies or monopolies to dominate the market that would eliminate or crush any competition, especially from small businesses, or, as Rodney Atkinson said, fascism is a corporate takeover of the world. The United States Supreme Court, under its head Chief Justice, Charles Evans Hughes, got rid of it, for they knew it did not represent the historical democratic principles of the United States. We will quote a number of credible sources to confirm what the NRA was and show that Roosevelt was only a face for the plans of a corporate takeover and how it is being repeated over again today. Anthony C. Sutton said that the economic recovery part of the New Deal was a creation of Wall Street, specifically Bernard Baruch and Gerald Swope of General Electric, in the form of the Swope Plan. Walter Teagle was one of the key administrators of NRA. President Roosevelt had abandoned the small businessman of the United States to the control of Wall Street. Fortunately, NRA failed. Big business attempted to oppress the little man. The codes were riddled with abuses and inconsistencies. It was put out of its misery by the Supreme Court in a Schechter-Poucher decision of 1935, although its failure was evident long before the Supreme Court decision. Though it failed, there was one system who not only praised FDR's NRA, but was also watching attentively and patiently with the hope that it would be reinstalled, for it would greatly benefit this system who has longed to regain control over the entire world, the papacy. In a book titled Behind the Dictators, published in 1942 and written by an ex-Catholic priest, Leo Lehman, he said that the National Catholic Welfare Conference praised the NRA, which is now admitted as having been patterned on fascist corporative lines and which was abolished by unanimous opinion of the US Supreme Court as destructive of American democracy. In spite of this, however, this plan of the Catholic Church says, had the NRA been permitted to continue, it could have readily been developed into the kind of industrial order recommended by the Holy Father, the Pope. John Flynn in the New York World Telegram, July 12, 1940, states that by the NRA, President Roosevelt unwittingly attempted to introduce this feature of fascism into our country. For these cooperatives are the means through which the leader exercises his dictatorial will. Corporatism is indeed the economic ingredient of fascism. The entire ideology of fascism and Nazism in social, economic, educational, religious, and military matters is contained in the corporate system, as Lady Quimbra said. Corporatism is fascism. His words have also been confirmed by one who was working inside of the US government. In the personal memoirs of President Herbert Hoover, we get an insight to how the US government really works. The narrator was first exposed to him where, as a trained mining engineer with vast business contacts, Hoover cut a business deal in Liberia in West Africa on behalf of the US rubber industry and the Firestone Company. He sabotaged the plans of the Pan-Africanist, the Right Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who had first made a deal with Charles Burgess King, the 17th president of Liberia, for a UNIA Back to Africa settlement program in the Republic of Liberia in the 1920s. Hoover was a man who was well connected in and out of office. He met with Adolf Hitler, Pope Pius XII, Belgian banker Emile Franqui, as confirmed by the New York Times 1931. Though a product of Wall Street also, he described how destructive his successor's NRA plan was. He said that among the early Roosevelt fascist measures was the National Recovery Act, the NRA of June 16, 1933. The origins of this scheme are worth repeating. These ideas were first suggested by Gerard Swope of the General Electric Company at a meeting of the electric industry in the winter of 1932. So a year before FDR was elected, businessman Gerard Swope, the president of General Electric, first suggested this fascist corporate system. And in this original transfer slip that Anthony C. Sutton got from the Hoover Institute's files from the Nuremberg Military Tribunal from General Electric, it is dated to March 2nd, 1933, and it is 60,000 Reichsmarks that was used to elect Adolf Hitler into office. Following this, they were adopted by the United States Chamber of Commerce. I tried to show him that this stuff was sheer fascism, that it was merely a remaking of Mussolini's corporate state, and refused to have any of it. So President Hoover knew that the United States was being remodeled on Mussolini's fascism, and he repeated what both Rodney Atkinson and Leo Lehman both said. He said that now with the NRA, he said Roosevelt shackled his common man to unrestrained monopolies. The act, as drafted by the administration, was passed by rubber stamp methods on May 1933. NRA codes have been crushing the life out of small business. So for fascism to ever work and to be successful, monopolies or big corporations have to crush competition of small businesses.
The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the dominance of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. Any single action by one of these companies can affect hundreds of millions of us in profound and lasting ways. These companies, as they exist today, have monopoly power. Their dominance is killing the small businesses, manufacturing, and overall dynamism that are the engines of the American economy.
If you're the owner of a small business experiencing hardship due to the recent coronavirus, COVID-19, The U.S. Small Business Administration is offering low-interest loans to help you get through these challenging times.
Tonight, the race is on for small businesses to apply for a new round of government funding.
The resurgence of COVID-19 this week has brought deepening anxiety for millions of small businesses.
Small businesses around the country are bearing the economic brunt of the coronavirus pandemic.
The toll this is taking on small businesses in the country, I don't think can be overestimated. There's a lot of people who are closing down, especially restaurants and, small businesses across the country.
These are the 5 most valuable companies in America. Notice anything? They're all tech companies, and their dominance is attracting attention from watchdog groups that say their market power is harming competition and the economy.
Can you imagine life without Google, Facebook, or Amazon? Chances are you're actually on one of those platforms right now watching this.
What is happening now, in my view, is a neo-feudalism, where the Zuckerbergs and Bezoses of the world are basically becoming the new lord and ladies.
The government has opened up an antitrust review of big tech. Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Apple. Do you share the government's concerns that any one of these companies, or all of them perhaps, are doing things, abusing their power and influence in such a way that it undermines either the political system, and we've heard about that, or perhaps the consumer economy, and we've heard about that too?
You could say I'm biased, but I see these as well-meaning, highly innovative companies that it's up to society to make sure that their innovation doesn't have negative side effects.
The reason why Google and Facebook are the most powerful companies in the world is because last year data surpassed oil in value. Data is the most valuable asset on Earth.
When people see the extent of the surveillance, I think they're going to be shocked.
Once again, their control of the marketplace allows them to do whatever it takes to crush independent business and expand their own power. This must end.
Is public money going to tech firms like Google, like Amazon, to perform public functions? So once again, a bonanza for the tech companies, who, by the way, have been doing very well during the pandemic already, where they see huge opportunities in telehealth, in the educational market, in public schools, in supporting us working from home and learning from home, and they're not looking for a kind of a traditional reopening, but rather a new paradigm.
In the book, The Shock Doctrine, Canadian author and filmmaker Naomi Klein has labeled this as disaster capitalism. It is when corporations that are usually kept in check through Western democratic laws can, in a crisis, act with immunity and take full advantage of a crisis, as Rahm Emanuel said at the opening of the study, and not only make huge profits, but also strip away people's freedoms for the so-called common good and safety of society, as we shall see near the end of the study. Even though recent studies have shown that almost 5 times as many people in the UK are now dying of influenza or pneumonia than COVID-19, according to the latest data from the Office for National Statistics in the UK in August 2020. That's interesting. They have bullied out smaller companies who will pose any competitive threat to them, and they have definitely capitalized on the COVID-19 lockdown interests. And even if we are observing how they work, we all have to admit that during the lockdown, we have had to some degree, depend upon their services. What the United States Supreme Court blocked in the 1930s to stop corporate fascism from spreading and taking root in the United States, disaster capitalism in the 21st century has allowed these 5 tech companies to take almost complete control over the global economy, where they can affect nearly every aspect of our everyday lives with no restraints. And as Malachi Martin said, money and technology will be one of the main controlling tools to harness the New World Order. What is downplayed is how deeply these tech companies are in bed with the US government and the secret intelligence services. Microsoft is a bit more bold and defends its ties to the military, with no apologies. But according to NBC News, there are thousands of contracts that highlight very quiet ties between big tech and US military, a covert liaison where big tech has merged with Big Brother. Not surprising at all. The CIA admits on her own website that it was her who actually created Google Earth. So the government and Big Brother have always had a bond. We're getting to the point where there will be no reversing the trends of these tech companies' control. And Leo Lehman said they will allow a dictator to do as he pleases. We can only imagine what is planned for the future. These tech companies are fulfilling the plans of the little-known but well-connected political advisor and Wall Street financier and millionaire Bernard Baruch, who, while working in the Woodrow Wilson administration in 1918, seated in this photo second from left, he created the War Industries Board, the forerunner to the NRA, for a few monopolies to have complete corporate takeover of the market. And he was not only the political advisor to FDR, but the behind-the-scenes mastermind of his presidential campaign, where he got bankers and corporations to financially bankroll him into the presidency. But Adolf Hitler was also fully financially backed by Wall Street. And though he has been played in satire to downplay his role, the 20th century bloodbath that has been cleverly labelled a world war was actually a European conflict from the beginning to the end, with the US corporate financial backing that drew the rest of the world in, that sadly came at a very, very deadly price. Avram Manhattan said, "What was their cost in blood?" World War I was more destructive than the 901 major wars of the past 2,400 years, 7 times more destructive than all of them combined. World War II was 4 times worse than World War I.
We believe that the Nazis and the fascists have asked for it, and they're going to get it.
An fremde Hilfe! Niemals! An Hilfe, die außerhalb unserer eigenen Nation, unseres eigenen Volkes liegt. In uns selbst allein liegt die Zukunft.
Adolf Hitler, though he was an Austrian, said in that speech that the Germans should not depend upon foreign help. But where did the majority of the financial support he received to sustain his war industry come from?
Don't sweat it, because when it comes to work, Ford Commercial Vehicles can take it, and bring it, and flat out work it. You might say they're wired for success. Ford Trucks and Vans, year after year, America's best-selling line of commercial vehicles.
Hi everybody, I'm Graham from Ford. Today we're marking the end of 91 years of manufacturing in Australia.
By the end of June, Ford's joint venture in Russia, Ford Solars, will close 3 of its 4 factories, stopping its production of passenger cars in the country and eliminating thousands of jobs.
U.S. car maker Ford says it will close its Bridgend engine plant in South Wales in September 2020.
Well, we're also following the auto industry right now. They are the latest victim of the virus outbreak, along with retailers and grocers. Detroit's automakers have just agreed to close all their factories, both Ford and GM confirming to Fox Business just moments ago.
For the past couple of years, both Ford and General Motors have been closing down their plants all over the world, losing sales where thousands of livelihoods are being threatened. In their zenith during the Second World War, when US soldiers arrived in Nazi Germany, they discovered, like these soldiers a few decades later in Vietnam, that their enemies in combat had American-made vehicles and weapons. The narrator got this article in the British newspaper The Daily Mail in the year 1998 that showed that the Nazis were receiving an import of vehicles from both General Motors and Ford, where there have been lawsuits that have been filed against these companies. Henry Ford, the US billionaire American industrialist, was a strong Nazi sympathizer who greatly admired Adolf Hitler. For his services to the Nazis, he was awarded the Grand Cross of the German Eagle in 1938 by Adolf Hitler. His services were also praised by Charles Coughlin, the Canadian-American Roman Catholic priest. It hit September 6, 1933, the year the NRA was launched. Alfred P. Stone Jr. was the US President, Chairman, and CEO of General Motors Corporation, who was also conducting business with Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany. His representative abroad, American engineer James D. Mooney, the president of General Motors overseas, was also given the same award as Henry Ford, as documented in the New York Times, August 11, 1938.
Today, there are more sensors on our planet than people. We're putting AI into everything, and everything into the cloud. It's all so smart. Because smart only really matters when we put it to work. Not just for a few of us, but for all of us. Let's put smart to work.
It can sometimes take years after an event, after many of the players are long dead, that classified documents are declassified for public viewing. And at the opening of the 21st century, many articles emerged of IBM's collaboration with the Nazis. It was through the intense efforts of one man's investigative research that he wrote in a book titled IBM and the Holocaust. It was by the investigative journalist Edwin Black, and he documented how Thomas J. Watson, the American businessman, CEO, chairman, and co-founder of IBM, conducted his business interests abroad. This photo shows him standing and speaking in front of a podium, and seated on his left is General Eisenhower, who later became a US president. This photo shows him standing on the far right, and in the center with a sleeveless dress is the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of President Roosevelt. He was well connected. But this photo shows Adolf Hitler seated on the far left, and sitting beside him on his right, conducting business with him, is Thomas J. Watson on June 28, 1937. Remember, war is a business. But who financially bankrolled Adolf Hitler?
JP Morgan Chase is a global company that has 260,000 employees and 40,000 technologists strong. Together, our business and technologists are developing next-generation platforms that move trillions of dollars throughout the global financial system.
It may be very hard for many people to stomach that the Western banks that they have a current account with were, at one time, doing business with the Nazis. But there were others who wanted to benefit from the dictators of Europe also. In May 2020, German Roman Catholic bishops made a public apology for their predecessors' disgusting role in the war crimes of Nazi Germany. Though the papacy is usually protected by historians and the media, every now and then a fact here and there is leaked out of how much of a role she has played in a major conflict. One man was an insider to the papacy support of the Führer. In the memoirs of Franz von Papen, the former Vice-Chancellor of Germany, Nazi Germany, that was signed on the 20th of July 1933, where von Papen is seated on the left, and Monsignor Eugenio Pacelli, who later became Pope Pius XII, is seated in the center. Von Papen later became a member of Hitler's first cabinet, where he is seated in the far right next to Adolf Hitler, and he shared his experience. He said that the Knights of Malta, of which I was a member, in Rome at Easter 1933, I went to negotiate the terms of the Concordat with Germany. There has been no Concordat between the Vatican and the Reich since the Reformation. The Vatican therefore had an intimate knowledge of conditions in Germany in 1933. An audience with Pope Pius XI, His Holiness welcomed my wife and myself most graciously, and remarked how pleased he was that the German government now had at its head a man uncompromisingly opposed to communism and Russian nihilism in all its forms. Franz von Papen confirms with his dialogue with Pope Pius XI that the Pope endorsed and supported the rise of Adolf Hitler. These are his own words. He continues, "The whole question of the finances of the Nazi movement at this period has become one of the most controversial issues connected with Hitler's eventual rise to power. The most documented account of the National Socialist sudden acquisition of funds was contained in a book published in 1933 called Die Gelbroden von het National Socialism. The author's name was given as Sidney Warburg, and he gave an exhaustive list of names, dates, and payments. The alleged author's thesis was that the American financial interests had sought to protect their investments in Europe by placing at the disposal of the Nazi Party through various intermediaries, and highlighted in red, banking houses, considerable sums of money to instigate a national revolution and ensure Germany's financial stability." His words were to be elaborated upon in more detail in another memoir, this time coming from one in the US government. In Ambassador Dodd's diary published in 1941, the US diplomat and historian William E. Dodd, the United States ambassador to Germany from 1933 to 1937, documented the role of two prominent men. US banker Winthrop Aldrich, the son of Nelson Aldrich on the left, and on the right is Ivy Lee, the man who is credited as the father of modern public relations. They were both to conduct a business with Adolf Hitler. This monument of Ivy Lee documents on lines 9 and 10 that he was a business client of John D. Rockefeller, so he is well connected in the business world. John D. Rockefeller Sr. is seated on the left with his grandchild on his lap. His son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., stands above him, and Jr.'s wife, who is seated on the right, is Abigail Green Aldrich, later to be called a Rockefeller, who was the daughter of Nelson Aldrich and the brother to Winthrop Aldrich. The Rockefellers founded the Standard Oil Company, at the time the largest oil company in the world, and Walter C. Teagle, who managed the NRA in President Roosevelt's government, was on the board of I.G. Farben and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, who was also the chairman and president of the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey. What role did he play in the development of the Nazi war government? William E. Dodd was shocked when he recorded in his diary and said, "Why did the Standard Oil Company of New York send $1 million over here, that is in Nazi Germany, in December 1933, to aid the Germans in making gasoline from soft coal for war emergencies?" Naive to world affairs, William Dodd was totally clueless that President Roosevelt was also backed by his Wall Street oil interests. In a nutshell, it would have been totally impossible for the Nazis, planes, cars, jeeps, tanks, warships, and submarines to function without US imported oil, for Germany has no oil reserves. Like William Dodd, this may be very shocking and disturbing for people who have been given a different narrative of the Second World War. But never forget these words from the narrator. War is a business. William Dodd continues. Winthrop W. Aldrich, president of the Chase National Bank of New York, was on his way to Hitler's quarters with the Reichsbank president Schacht and the Minister of Economics Schmidt. The bank spoke of the conversation he and Mr. Aldrich had had some 10 days with the Chancellor at his summer palace. He, Adolf Hitler, has no conception of international relationships. He considers himself a German messiah, but despite Hitler's attitude, these bankers feel they can work with him. Ivy Lee and his son James came to lunch. Ivy Lee showed himself at once a capitalist and an advocate of fascism. He told stories of his fight for Russian recognition and was disposed to claim credit for it. His sole aim was the same man who said in his speech that the Germans should not depend upon foreign help. The Bushes are not only members of a secret society, the Skull and Bones, and well connected with industry and intelligence, but Prescott Sheldon Bush, the grandfather of the current George Bush, was also doing business with Hitler, where his bank was also tied to the funding of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi office. And many banks in Europe were also conducting business with Adolf Hitler. So the Nazis were well looked after financially, which shows that the Nuremberg trials was a bit of a one-sided joke. But what is sad is that today, these bankers are still manipulating the economy to bring people to their knees. And while the poor are becoming even more poor, the bankers, like the tech companies, are capitalizing on the vulnerability of the climate. With the setting up of concentration camps for undesirables and the elimination of those who the state does not like, World War II should be a solid object lesson we should all be learning from. Do you know why? Because we are seeing that corporations can gamble with two of the mechanisms that were put into place to create a fascist society is being repeated over again during the coronavirus COVID-19 lockdown. So the Second World War was the first attempt in human history of a corporate takeover of the entire world, where the United States and its Wall Street industrial companies and corporations and banks were to try to set up fascist states in the old world and even in the United States of America, where the Vatican also was to take advantage of this totalitarian control over the planet. But what was very interesting is that they marginalize groups who they don't like and murder them. Do you think that could happen all over again?
Understand what's going on around you. You are in a state of war, and you have precious little time to save yourself. The disaster is coming closer and closer. The danger is real.
You're sending soldiers into the island disguised as citizens.
This country needs for this to work.
I really only have one question. Whose side are you on?
People chose to do away with emotions. Those morning injections take them away.
When people have the freedom to choose, they choose wrong.
100 years ago, after the war, our founders created a system they believed would create lasting peace. They divided society into 5 factions.
The only way you can survive is for each of you to claim your rightful place.
Everyone is tested to determine who we are and where we belong.
You don't fit into a category. They can't control you. You can't trust anyone.
Initiates, we will be watching to see who you really are.
Divergence threaten the system. It won't be safe until they're removed.
My replicants will never rebel. They will never run. They will simply obey.
By the time you guys grow up, there won't be one book left. Yes, sir! Little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
News, facts, memoirs, internetable, burn it.
Start over. These children are the future of humanity. You will raise these children to be atheists.
Four, three, two, one.
It is very clear from these clips that a generation is being trained to not have freedom of choice, where free will is non-existent. Children are being reprogrammed and indoctrinated as atheists, and those who do not conform will be eliminated. Do you think that this is just entertainment? The US Department of Defense, better known as the Pentagon, not only works with the video game industry to recruit young people and to shape people's attitude towards American foreign policy, but it also works within the corridors of Hollywood to do the exact same thing, where they foretell or outline the future of this world, and they also teach children to be obedient to the state, or there will be dire consequences. That is the main objective of these media productions, according to the Guardian newspaper. But in 1933, with the election of both Adolf Hitler and Franklin D. Roosevelt, men who were selected to act out what is fulfilling today, in that same year, a book already quoted, Occult Theocracy, was published that exposed these plans and what we have been seeing during the COVID lockdown. The Right Honourable Lady Queenborough, who died mysteriously in that same year, a number of months before the book was published, said that I have endeavoured to expose the means and methods used by a secret world, one might almost say an underworld, to dominate and destroy not only the so-called upper classes, but also the better portion of all classes. Since the lockdown, the middle classes and their small businesses have been under attack, as already mentioned, and the coronavirus is killing the middle class, as Lady Queenborough said would happen, and can lead them into poverty all over the planet, especially in the developing world, where they are at risk of being wiped out. In 2011, Africa's middle class tripled to 310 million within 30 years. But the coronavirus is battering Africa's growing middle class. And in Asia also, COVID has smashed Indian middle class dreams. While this may look like it came as a result of the lockdown only, those who look into things a little deeper have always known that the middle class has been getting smaller and smaller, generation by generation. According to the Enterprise Research Centre, in the UK in Northern Europe, 61,472 limited companies folded between the start of March and mid-April 2020. But this was also as a result of the uncertainty of Brexit. It was reported in August 2020 that in Kuwait in Western Asia, they are running out of money to pay public salaries, and they will not be able to pay salaries beyond October. That's deep. In Japan, in East Asia that has the world's third largest economy, the GPIF, the world's largest pension fund, had a quarterly loss of $165 billion during the lockdown, and it has suffered its biggest economic slump on record. But worst is yet to come, according to the Japan Times. This woman was spot on. Lady Queenborough continues. 3 factors can help from being completely destroyed by the combined forces of that underworld. Number 1, a flawless life. Number 2, independent means. And number 3, and real friends. Though the narrator chooses to be a loner and enjoys it, he still takes an opportunity to spend time in the beauty of nature in the British Isles with friends. When you are in nature, it is an escape from the miserable faces in the cities, and it helps you to appreciate the little that you have and the simple things in life that also includes friendship. Lady Queenborough continues. The international press is the medium that is used to control public opinion. They create a dangerous negative state of mind as opposed to the Christian or positive. The individual, when robbed of his initiative, can easily be swayed and guided by the will of others. Therein resides the power of hypnotism, and in this lies the shibboleth of toleration, which in fact paralyzes opposition to evil, serves an esoteric purpose suspected by few. Lady Queenborough showed how the media shapes how we look at the world, and the exact method used to initiate people into secret societies is the same way this generation is also being slowly initiated into the unquestionable groupthink globalization mentality, where we cannot challenge anything, but we must be tolerant of all beliefs so we don't hurt the feelings and fragility of this spineless generation. The Pentagon wants more control over the news. That's fascism. The Ministry of Defense in the UK is blacklisting journalists who report on the UK military. Jewish American academic Norman Finkelstein has been deported and banned for criticizing Israel. And scientists say you cannot do your own research. You must follow the same line of thinking. And what will happen if you question the main westernized colonial narrative in news reporting? The US Department of Homeland Security, with assistance from the FBI, published a document in 2009 where it warned on page 4 that, and highlighted in red, anti-government conspiracy theories and their own quotes, end times prophecies could motivate extremist individuals. Whose secret doctrine was
Would you take it?
Welcome to
she can be within. Shows to train this current generation that their young, innocent minds are not yet mature enough to handle. They will now find the difference between a male and a female, and the bills. And over 20 years later, most unhappiest children, unloved. Sadly, a lot has to do with the deep hypocrisy and corruption within the churches. Conditions in the country. One man knew and for what is to come in the not too distant future of the past. In the Louvre Museum, was once worshipped in the Middle East in the place Cambridge, and its promotion, and Beyonce Knowles in her black atoms.
Stars
divino, ma lo esige. L'evoluzione nella natura
All roads will lead to Rome, and the ancient has been zealously pushing for a global government, a new world order, a totalitarian governed planet like the papacy, where she has cleverly disguised her true aims with the language of peace. She has been consistent and will not stop until she regains complete supremacy, and she says that once everything is set up and in place, she will regain control. Should change most watched political drama on earth, and whether you are into politics or not, the decisions that are especially in those Catholic swing states, that they will decide who will become global lockdown. Gathering. Representatives from these tech companies were given instruction about the use of AI and followed the papacy's mandate called Rome Call for AI Ethics, and they have followed the Vatican's instruction and have incorporated it into their companies' policies.
In June, both Amazon and Microsoft announced they won't sell their facial recognition software to police until stronger regulation is in place, and IBM announced it's getting out of the facial recognition business altogether.
The Vatican has tapped into the tech world for she understands their influence. And if a Jesuit Pope has this level of influence over the most powerful financial tech conglomerates on earth, who are acting like governments and are slowly reintroducing fascism into the modern digital age, and when even the United States Department of Defense, better known as the Pentagon, the symbol of the US military, and the complex and the Vatican have been working together and have a close alliance that has not ceased. And if you study them both very closely, these two kingdoms are both on the same course with the same aims and goals. So with the papacy's vast global influence, how will she regain power? In central London, there is a church called St. Giles Church, and inside are the buried remains of a man whose name appears at the top of this metal plaque, John Fox, the 16th century English historian and martyrologist. In London's Victorian Albert Museum, there is on display copies of his work, the famous multi-volume set, The Book of Martyrs, where it documents the famous Spanish Inquisition. Today, the Vatican is fully justifying the frightening horrors and torture of the Inquisition, saying it was not actually as bad as people have made it out to be. But we have to study real history, and we shall see how the entire structure of the modern New World Order is being carefully modeled after medieval papal Europe, where all the instruments of the papal Inquisition are now in place and is being followed to the T starting from the aftermath of 9/11 and continue right down into the coronavirus COVID-19 lockdown. She's biding her time and just waiting. Listen to the words of John Fox. In the time of Innocent III, the Reformed religion had occasioned such a noise throughout Europe that the Catholics began to fear their church was in danger, and the Pope was determined to impede as much as possible the progress of the Reformation. He accordingly instituted a number of inquisitors, persons who were to make inquiry after, apprehend, and punish the Reformed heretics. Dominic became the first Inquisitor General. Pope Innocent III was not innocent. He introduced Murder Inc., one of the first attempts in modern times to crush free speech with his papal inquisition. Dominic, who was to found the Dominican order, was Pope Innocent's alter ego, and these two men were to target a community who posed a threat to papal authority. Who were they? John Fox says that the Albigenses were a people of the Reformed religion who inhabited the country of Albi. They were condemned on account of their religion in the Council of Lateran by order of Pope Alexander III, but they increased so rapidly that many cities were inhabited exclusively by persons of their persuasion, and several eminent noblemen embraced their doctrines, but Rome was to purge them out of history. This picture shows a Dominic seated at the top in the center as Inquisitor General, presiding over an auto de fe, and at the very bottom of the picture, you can see the innocent Albigenses being led to death to be burnt at the stake for their Bible-based beliefs. But it wasn't only their physical bodies that was to be done away with. Their literature was also to be burnt, so there will be no trace of their history and of their works. While many may think that this brutality and purging of free speech died out in the Dark Ages, the Nazis reintroduced and continued this papal tradition, where they not only ethnically purged a high number of human beings who they saw as a threat to the state, but in 1933, bonfires were built all over the country by university students, where, like the Dominicans, they burned thousands of books that threatened Adolf Hitler's one-sided racialized view of the world. Today, they do not purge innocent individuals, well, depending on where you live in the world, but the modern-day cancel culture is silencing voices who they do not like or find as a threat if they have a level of influence. And the modern tech world is slowly purging out free speech from digital platforms. They have banned foreign TV channels who give an alternative view like Press TV. Facebook is colluding with state governments to quash free speech. And many are beginning to see that the more power big tech has, it is silencing voices who pose a threat. And during the lockdown, media companies are carefully monitoring influential YouTubers, and the policy of the Papal Inquisition to crush free speech is slowly regaining control.
We all think the free market's great. We think competition is great. We love the fact that these are American companies. But what's not great is censoring people, censoring conservatives, and trying to impact elections.
So this guy has more than 180,000 people who follow him. He just actually posted a video where he's drawing any potential coronavirus vaccine into other debunked theories about vaccines. Coronavirus equals planned depopulation, is what another fan says. I mean, this could be really dangerous.
There's a flow of misinformation online about the virus, and health officials are mounting a concerted effort to combat it. They're calling it an infodemic.
Claims from former employees that Facebook hides conservative content from the trending section were backed up by a detailed study. Google, YouTube, and Twitter partner with leftist groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center that hate conservatives.
Well, WhatsApp has just announced that it's limiting the number of people or groups who can forward messages from 20 to 5. And the messaging service, which is owned by Facebook, has been getting a lot of criticism over its handling of misinformation over the past 2 years.
So free speech is being subtly eroded, and this is another form of the Inquisition being reintroduced. John Fox continues. He said, "What kind of community must that be whence gratitude, love, and mutual forbearance with human frailties are banished. What ideas are we to form of, and highlighted in red, a tribunal which obliges children not only to stifle every soft impulse of gratitude, love, and respect due to those who gave them birth, but even forces them under the most rigorous penalties, and highlighted in red, to be spies over their parents? Is it possible that this can happen over again?
Are you CIA?
How'd you get in here?
Oh, okay, she has a camera. She might be streaming. I want you to teach me how to be a spy.
Just to be clear, this is a one-time arrangement. Never again.
Hello, children. I am a spy.
Attention, spy kids. Get the necklace back.
When time stops,
Fire up your gadgets.
They're not activated.
the adventure begins. Spy Kids, all the time in the world.
Though people think Hollywood is solely just entertainment, it does have some underlying truths in its messages. In the year 2019, information was leaked that the British intelligence does actually use children as undercover spies. This has created quite a bit of a problem, for it does put vulnerable children's lives at risk. But like the days of the Inquisition, these child spies have also been used to infiltrate into families. History does repeat itself. John Fox continues. They, the Inquisitors, were permitted to excommunicate or sentence to death whom they thought proper. And please look at the words underlined and highlighted in red. Upon the slightest information of heresy. For suspicion alone is deemed a cause of condemnation. Do you think that this system can be reintroduced all over again?
Yeah. I don't know how it's
There hasn't been a murder in 6 years. There's nothing wrong with the system. It is
Perfect. I agree.
Look at me. Positive for Howard Marks. I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks and Donald Dubin that was take place today, April 22nd, at 0800 hours, 4 minutes.
No. 20269.
Police in Los Angeles are trying to predict the future.
We know where crime happened yesterday, but where is it going to happen tomorrow and the next day?
And they're not alone. More and more departments are using data-driven algorithms to forecast crime.
This is Critical Comms World in Barcelona, Spain. Despite being held in the same venue as the world's largest cell phone event, Mobile World Congress, this is a conference few, other than those directly involved in emergency services, would even know existed. It was a Motorola product that everyone had their eyes on. It's called IDP, Intelligent Data Portal, but that could just as easily be intelligent data policing. It's not only about where crimes are being committed right now, but also where the next crime could occur.
Is Japan's controversial law that targets terror conspiracies is now in effect. It was pushed through by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's ruling bloc about a month ago, despite strong opposition. The controversial law enables authorities to penalize the planning of a range of crimes, 277 to be exact. It's a major change to Japan's legal system, which until now only punished crimes after they have been committed.
Anywhere that you are in a public space, certainly in the US, the tech companies can take your face. Why do they want your face so badly? Well, first of all, obviously, it's very important to know who's doing what and where they're going and where they are and so forth. But there are even deeper reasons. There are many, many muscles in the face, and those muscles can combine into hundreds of different kinds of gestures. They do facial recognition analysis to compute those gestures because those gestures predict emotion. And once they know what you're feeling, that becomes one of the most powerful predictors of your behavior.
Predicting a crime before it even happens in the 2017 Japanese anti-terror conspiracy law, algorithms in modern-day policing, and monitoring individual civilians' facial recognition in AI technology without their consent echoes the exact same pre-crime principle of the Papal Inquisition. John Fox continues. All Roman highlighted in red to give immediate information even of their nearest and dearest friends if they judge them to be heretics or any ways inclining to heresy. What has the entire world been encouraged to do by their governments during the coronavirus COVID-19 lockdown? Snitching.
What if you were watched every moment of your life?
How many cameras you got there in that town?
5,000. Maybe you see something suspicious, but you don't want to get involved. It's nothing, you think. Can you be sure? If you see something, say something. Report suspicious activity to local authorities.
This summer, Ring partnered with the Fort Lauderdale Police Department for a pilot program. The idea, donate a few Ring cameras to some communities, but more importantly, start using something called the Neighbors app. Your neighbors can be notified instantly as well. The network of information sharing and neighbors being on alert is reminiscent of the Neighborhood Crime Watch, a movement that has faded away. Fort Lauderdale Police Chief Rick Maglione believes this next-generation Crime Watch app is the future.
Can contact the police department anonymously.
And remember, I'm going to be clear about this. I need everyday New Yorkers, I need all of you, if you see violations of social distancing, if you see gatherings, you got to report them. So you can call 311 or you can just snap a photo, write in the location where it is, and text to 311-692. And you can live by that same idea we talked about in the fight against terror. If you see something, say something. I'm sorry. This is not snitching. This is saving lives. You got to do it.
You know the old expression about snitches? Well, in this case, snitches get rewards. We want to thank you for turning folks in and making sure we are all safe.
Well, hundreds of St. Louis County residents answered the call, reporting businesses for failing to comply with stay-at-home orders.
Those whistleblowers thought they were keeping people safe, but it backfired when all of their information ended up on social media.
But other British police forces and authorities around the world are taking advantage of this trend and encouraging their citizens to watch and report.
People monitor, their neighbors, even their relatives.
Some provinces have started giving an incentive to monitor family members' travel histories and health. In Sichuan province in western China, snitching can snag you as much as 5,000 yuan. That's roughly equivalent to a monthly salary that's more than minimum wage. One government in Guangdong province is offering 30 face masks in exchange for snitch reports.
Since 9/11, the world has been cleverly engineered to be a global snitch culture. And the tech companies who have monopolized the planet have rode upon the euphoria of fear and have also been encouraging their users to snitch on each other. And the lockdown has made snitching a part of our everyday global culture. This is the new normal. But where are we going with this study? What is its overall aim? Where is this lockdown going to take us? The world is going to get to a point where every single person on this earth is going to have to decide their future destiny. No one can be on the fence. And no matter every man is going to have to make a clear and conscious decision. There has always been just two clear and distinct beliefs on this earth. Those who want to worship both man and the forces of nature, and those who want to give complete and total homage and adoration to God, who created everything our naked eye can see. These two beliefs are going to eventually clash. But what exactly is worship? A prolific writer gives a very thorough and detailed description, and Dr. James Aiken Wiley says that worship, it is true, is a spiritual thing. We are creatures of sense. We naturally seek to express our feelings through sensible signs. And these signs again react upon our feelings and help to intensify and elevate them. Love is the soul of worship. But worship is not meant for the profit of only the man who offers it. It is meant for that of others also. As scientists closely study the human brain and how the cerebral cortex works, they have discovered that, as Wiley said, man is a creature who was created to worship. It is who or what he worships that creates a conflict. The Holy Scriptures not only defines what worship is, but also prophetically forewarns both the church and the world of the two clear and distinct groups that will be on. Jesus in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 10 describes worship as to serve, and in this context it means to serve God. In 1 Kings chapter 16 and verse 31, the word worship is also defined as a means to serve, and in this concept it is the worship of the nature fertility deity Baal or Baal. So this is the biblical definition of worship. You either worship or serve God or worship nature and man. In Genesis chapter 4 verses 6 and 7, God has always given man free will to choose who or what he wants to serve. And in Romans chapter 6 and verse 16, it repeats that whatever we choose to serve or become a servant to, that is what we will allow to become a master over us, and they both come with a price. But in Revelation chapter 14 and verse 7 and verse 9, it outlines two different forms of worship that will eventually distinguish the inhabitants of the earth at the very end. Those who honor and worship God as creator, and those who worship the beast and his image. But how will they clear character? And Revelation chapter 14 and verse 1 describes those who have Yahweh, God the Father's name or character, written in their foreheads, their mind. And Revelation chapter 14 and verse 11 describes those who have the image or name or character of the beast. The words image and name are used interchangeably. So how do these two groups acquire this name or image? Romans chapter 1 and verse 23 says that when you change the glory of the uncorruptible God by rejecting him, you will make an image like to a corruptible man. That is when you follow your own heart. So how can you be restored back into the image of God? 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18 says, by beholding that self-denial, consistent Bible study and daily prayer, we are changed into the same image. How often? From glory to glory. The Cain and Abel scenario will be repeated over again, and the final issue on this earth will be over your character. As there is no reversing the trend of this lockdown, as we reflect and ponder on our future destiny, let us make sure that we choose the right name.
I know there was a lot of data, but where do we go from here? We've seen all the things taking place in this world and we see where everything is going. What can we offer people? Well, in the next study, it is going to be dealing with the new heaven and the new earth, and it will be titled Ur of the Chaldees, Part 2. I'll give you a 6-minute insight what it's going to be about, but in the meantime, please research everything you have seen in this study.
For since the beginning of the world, Men have not heard, nor perceived by the ear, neither hath the eye seen, O God, beside thee, what he hath prepared for him that waiteth for him. It is very difficult, or you could say practically impossible, for our finite minds to even imagine living in a complete new environment where there is peace and harmony in all the surrounding space. Imagine drinking pure, uncontaminated, crystal clear water that proceeds from God's throne. No rainbows to remind us about a global flood. Imagine living in a brand new world where there is no night at all. Strange, isn't it? It is a promise that just does not fit into our reality, even though we are told that our mortal bodies will become immortal. Some scientists say that Jupiter's gravity protects us against comets and asteroids. But in the new Earth, it is very highly unlikely that we will be invaded by a cluster of asteroids in a brand new heaven and in a brand new Earth. Imagine living in a world with no fears of hurricanes or typhoons. We don't need to worry about that, for we are told that there will be no more huge oceans to divide us. There will be no more sea. Imagine living in a world where there will be no use for doctors and nurses, where people would not have to make any efforts on making a single face mask for the citizens of the world. Even though many wear masks in the public anyway, pretending to be someone who they are not. In the new Earth, we do not have to worry about a face mask. There will be no more viruses, for the atmosphere will be pure. Imagine children living in a world where they will not have to worry about being violated and will not need any counseling to protect them from ongoing unresolved childhood issues later on in life. It will be a world where man will be going back to his original natural plant-based diet of the herb-bearing seed, where the creatures of the ocean can swim about freely and do not have to worry about being the meal for a predator or end up under the kitchen knife of a household chef that provides a meal for a family. A world where antelopes do not have to worry about being on their guard and on the lookout for fear of becoming an afternoon meal for a pack of wild, carnivorous lions. In the earth made new, all creatures will live in perfect harmony with each other like they once did. This may be absurd to many people who have a natural selection worldview. They will laugh you to scorn. You may want to know why. Alligators and crocodiles are flesh-eating reptiles who navigate the waters for their prey, who devour its catch with their razor-like teeth. When you compare the skull of a modern croc with its earliest forebears, over thousands of years it has amazingly shrunk. It is hard to believe that these carnivorous creatures were once herbivores roaming this earth. But when scientists study their teeth with close observation, they have recently discovered that the earliest crocs and alligators were originally herbivores. They had a diet of plants. This may be shocking to many, but if you just read Genesis chapter 1 and verse 30, scientists are only confirming what God already said in the beginning. Can you imagine both man and beast having absolutely no fear of snakes, where the dust shall be the snake's food according to the prophet Isaiah? And God will probably restore it back to how it was originally. Maybe it had wings and legs before it was cursed to crawl on its belly. In the new heaven and the new earth, God himself shall wipe away all of our tears. Whether it be tears of sorrow for losing lost ones or for tears of joy, the narrator can't say. But this pilgrimage to the heavenly Canaan has very deep roots. When the patriarch Abraham migrated out of Ur of the Chaldees to be the spiritual father of many different nations around the world through Christ, what were his true underlying motives for leaving that city? Hebrews chapter 11 verses 8, 9 and 10 says, "By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God." Where is that city? But ye are come unto Mount Zion, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, according to Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 22. And Revelation chapter 21 verses 1 and 2 says, And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. This is what Abraham was looking forward to. And Nehemiah chapter 9 says that when he left Ur of the Chaldees, his name changed. And those who spiritually come out of the last world system will also be given a brand new name by God in Revelation chapter 2 and verse 17. Let us hold on to the eternal promises so we can secure our place in our new home, and don't let no man take your crown. This will be what we will be covering in Ur of the Chaldees, part 2.
The movement had focused on Christ from the beginning. The early Advent believers asked the question, when is Jesus coming? However, after the great disappointment of 1844, they then moved on to ask the question, what is he doing? By the early 1880s, though, the church had lost sight of Christ and had failed to make him the center of its doctrines. A spirit of debating had settled in, and they were winning people over to the church more through debating and a theoretical ascent of knowledge rather than by emphasizing heart change. The 1888 General Conference session is the most famous GC session in our history, but unfortunately it's remembered for negative reasons, with the questions often being framed, what if? It was held here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, from October the 17th to November the 4th, and it was the 27th session held. It was held in the newly constructed Adventist church that was located on the northwest corner of the intersection behind me. At the time, world membership was 27,000, and there were 90 delegates present, small by today's standards. Mission work in the South Pacific, city evangelism, amongst other ordinary matters were discussed, but no one remembers these. Ellen White later commented, I have been instructed by God that the terrible experience at the Minneapolis conference is one of the saddest chapters in the history of the believers of present truth. Prior to the GC session, the theological tension had been building, with articles being published by both sides, something that Ellen White spoke very strongly against. Also, at the various camp meetings, different presentations were given, and a spirit of opposition, debate, and bitterness was aroused. However, this would come to a head here in Minneapolis. The principal characters at this GC session were A.T. Jones and E.J. Wagner, both in their 30s, and Uriah Smith and G.I. Butler, both in their 50s. As the two younger men presented their messages of righteousness by faith, they were met with opposition. They were presenting on the importance of the centrality of the cross and of Christ's righteousness, and the importance of seeing the law in its correct context. However, one of the arguments that they used to show this was that the law in Galatians 3 was the ceremonial law and not the moral law. This was met with stiff opposition, as some thought that the teaching of the Sabbath was under threat and would lead to misinterpretation and misunderstanding from other denominations. They were invited to debate, and although this practice was common at the time, they refused to. They hadn't come to do that. A rebuttal presentation was made, but the only response at the next session was to read Bible passages in turn on the love of God. No explanation given, just the Bible read. The impact was profound. Many were impacted by the messages, with S.N. Haskell and J.O. Corliss being two of them. The following year, revivals would take place all over the United States of America, with Ellen White Jones and Wagner leading out, one of which took place in South Lancaster, Massachusetts. Commenting later on, Ellen White said, "I have never seen a revival go forward with such thoroughness and yet remain so free of undue excitement." A few years later, Uriah Smith would apologize to Ellen White for how he had responded and would also make a public apology in the Dime Tabernacle in Battle Creek. Not an easy thing to do. One of the sad outcomes of 1888 is that the principal presenters of Jones and Wagner would eventually end up apostatizing and leaving the church. The reasons for this are many and cannot be adequately explained in a few minutes. Some of the responsibility rests with them for not letting the message completely change their own hearts. Yet some blame must be apportioned to the brethren who so strongly and bitterly opposed them. This opposition would become a difficult and overmastering temptation to the young messengers. And whilst this does not excuse their departure, it does give us some understanding. A key lesson that we didn't learn in 1888 and that we still struggle with today is how to be a Christian whilst in conflict with someone else. How do you show Christ-like love when the person that you're discussing or debating with has a vastly different viewpoint to you and or maybe treating you wrongly? May we learn to be graceful with those we disagree with in the conflicts that we have today. The church would move on over time and realize the issue that was debated wasn't of the magnitude that people thought it was at the time. So often we major in minors. Ellen White would say many times that the law in Galatians wasn't a major issue and that the church shouldn't make it so. Today it's easy to get sidetracked on other issues and miss the bigger picture. Jones and Wagner were some great preachers, some of the brightest minds that our church has seen, and yet ultimately they lost sight of Jesus. Today we need to be careful that we don't follow men, but that we follow God's word and the message that is contained there. It wasn't the message that was at fault, but it was the attitude and spirit of those involved on both sides. The message that they gave will need to be given again, and God will raise up other people who will overcome where they failed. May we be part of sharing the beautiful message of the love of God and the righteousness of Christ to the world.